We often work on inputs, like we spent X billions of dollars on problem Y, whatever that is. The question is, well, did we solve the problem? What was the sort of the return on investment from the public good? I think the future needs to be able to not only know the what, but the how things are going, just helping the first branch do even better oversight, not just from input statements, working from this is what we got out of it.
Welcome to Management Matters. I'm James-Christian Blockwood. This week's episode explores how oversight, accountability, and innovation can work together to strengthen American governance. Our guests today are two nationally recognized leaders who approach these challenges from complementary perspectives, one grounded in evidence-based oversight and technology assessment, the other in congressional reform and governance policy. Tim Persons is a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration, principal for digital assurance and transparency at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the former chief scientist and managing director at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Dan Lips is a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, where he brings more than 2 decades of experience in congressional oversight, national security, cybersecurity, and education policy. Welcome to you both.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Let's dive in. We're having national conversation about government, and not necessarily policy and politics, but truly about government and how government serves the people. And it's been a long time coming, and so I'm encouraged for this conversation. But what I'm not hearing is, what does effective governance mean? So in 2026, with all that we have going on and all the challenges of the past and the potential of the future, what does effective governance mean? Dan, maybe we start with you.
I would start with a government that's accountable to the American people. And critically, in 2026, I think that answering that question requires thinking about our current government finances. The Congressional Budget Office recently projected that we're really on an unsustainable fiscal path with federal deficits heading towards more than $2 trillion over the next decade. When we think about what government services should be provided to the American people, we need to be thinking about what the American people can afford.
Dan puts an important point on the table. We are on an unsustainable fiscal path. How do you see effective governance, and what are some of the things that you think about we need to do to get there?
When you think about that level of debt, that we all are in debt in that sense from a national perspective, that's never good. And the word unsustainable, I think, is appropriate in this case. I say that because I think really when you ask about what effective governance is, I think of that which promotes or best promotes human flourishing, right? And you really look at this in the U.S. Constitution, and it talks about all these things like limiting government so that you have human freedom, right? Allowing for the general welfare and the goodness, the happiness, et cetera, freedom of religion, freedom of speech and press, et cetera, all these sort of things. And debt is essentially a form of non-freedom, right? Because now we're striking at the human flourishing in terms of going massively into debt. We've got to learn to spend within our means. It's been a constant thing that the Comptroller General of the U.S., the GAO, has been in good government voices like Dan, et cetera, have been propounding on. I hear you saying the same thing, James-Christian. That's, to me, is what effective governance is, and we have to get out of our prison of debt for our future generations.
There's many ways to do that, oversight being one of them. And we have now technological advances that can actually help with oversight. Dan, what does modern oversight look like when you have technologies that can help you do that, but you also have technologies that are evolving faster than laws and how institutions can use them?
It's a good question. I think that we need to be thinking about the institutions that are able to conduct oversight. Tim mentioned the GAO. I previously served on Capitol Hill as a Senate staffer. And to get the kind of effective governance that Tim was discussing earlier, it requires, say, lawmakers on Capitol Hill stepping up and asking questions about, are the programs that we are funding working? Are the government agencies that we are empowering with laws and scarce resources doing these things effectively? That requires facts, it requires evidence, and it requires judgment and proactive lawmakers making laws and doing oversight and using the appropriations process to make sure that these things work. Today, I think there's a lot of exciting developments around technology. We see this in our private civil society lives, but in government, too often things have been implemented too slowly. You consider how the federal government spends $150 billion in improper payments every year. We know that despite years and years of warnings around misspending, the federal government still sends checks to people who are deceased. There's interesting ways that technology can be used to address program integrity, to provide more real-time and factual information to Congress to make these types of decisions and to leaders in the White House. It's a really exciting time, but it requires Capitol Hill is stepping up and conducting meaningful oversight.
I really like, Dan, what you were just saying. I think so much of oversight is like just getting that proper information. James-Christian, you're talking about technologies. We're in the era of AI and massive, unbelievable information processing that none of us who've been in the sort of the technology areas like computer science, AI, et cetera, like I've been in, could even imagine. So there's a tremendous opportunity, but we do need that information. I think it's especially time to really bring to bear those technologies to support good, effective, I would say, outcomes-based oversight. Because so often, you all know this, we often work on inputs. Like we spent X billions of dollars on problem Y, whatever that is. And the question is, did we solve the problem? What did we get out of that? What was the sort of the return on investment from the public good? I think the future needs to be able to not only know the what, but the how things are going using these AI and data analytic type technologies to be able to answer, I think, key oversight, just helping the first branch do even better oversight, but not just from input statements, right? Working from this is what we got out of it.
Tim, you either developed or deployed technologies when you were in federal service. Is there a silver bullet when it comes to technology? Is there one technology that you would really suggest that the government adopts, or how do you think about what's necessary to get that oversight you mentioned?
It's people who are creative problem solvers. They think from design principles first, right? What am I trying to do to, let's say, evaluate this complicated program or whatever this is? And then it does bring in the technologies, but it's not a tech-led answer first, right? You work from defining the problem and then you apply the technologies. You need to understand them to be able to apply them in the right way as the right tools. But that's the way to do it. Otherwise, you're just saying, here, I have this cool tool and it's going to change oversight. Do you even understand what the question is that you're answering? Dan's been a staffer. So it's like, what do the staff and the senators, the members need on this to help, again, achieve their first branch goals and oversight that they were elected to do?
Dan, let's step back from technology. We'll come back to it, but let's talk about governance. We keep talking about the first branch. Congress has a huge remit with incredible authority. You think about what it can do in terms of appropriations, subpoena power, looking at having legislative branch capabilities look into programs specifically. There's a lot of power there to check different parts of the executive branch and really ensure that we are on the right path in terms of fiscal sustainability, but also where we would want to go as a society. What do you see as the biggest gaps in Congress's ability to help manage these complex programs and to help bring really that effective governance piece in our sites?
In my view, the biggest challenge that Congress faces right now is shifting the focus from politics towards addressing the nation's big challenges. When we think about what Congress needs to do to conduct effective oversight over federal laws and programs, one, it requires lawmakers who are primarily focused on doing the job of conducting oversight, attending hearings, asking hard questions, and being prepared to make the difficult compromises that are often made in negotiating legislation and thinking critically about how to fund programs through appropriations. I think an unfortunate reality of our current political environment is that many lawmakers aren't coming to Capitol Hill or are able to really focus on that aspect of their work. There's other issues. There's congressional capacity. Do they have enough staff and expertise and help from the support agencies like GAO and CRS and so forth? But ultimately, it comes down to having lawmakers who really want to focus on that aspect of the work.
Tim, what do you think about the question around, does Congress have the right capacity and legislative branch support? There's CRS, there's GAO, there's CBO, there's incredible congressional staff on the Hill, and Congress has the largest convening power of almost any body in the world.
Yeah, I think in short, there's such a need for increased capacity and support. Now, that being said, I am a fan of, not just because that GAO is a national treasure, CRS, all of these entities are there. I think the question is, how do we get we're all in this world of doing more with less. So I think the idea of saying we need to double the size of this or add new institutions, I'm not sure that's going to be the way of the future. I think it's how do we leverage these exponentially powerful tools like generative AI and all of the way it can now generate information or do things in a way that has never been seen before. I think how we upgrade or upskill those agencies to get more out of them, leveraged by the technology, because they have incredible staff, and we just want to be able to equip them to be able to even move faster, be deeper, more incisive, just in time for the members to be able to do that. I think that's the way of the future.
Dan, can you talk a little bit about what's the relationship between branches? You've got obviously executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial is in there as well. But is that playing a factor in really effective governance? Look, we need to make sure that we're maintaining public trust, that we have transparency, we have accountability. That doesn't happen in isolation. So can you talk about the relationship between branches and what might need to happen to help improve in those areas?
One of the ways to restore public trust in American governance would be for Congress to focus on fact-finding oversight and presenting information to the American people. Too often, I think, what happens in congressional hearings and through the congressional oversight process, it turns into a sort of gotcha game of who can grab headlines, scoring political points, and so forth. And one of the valuable things I saw was lawmakers who are really focused on partnering with the leaders in federal agencies to identify problems that need to be addressed, make facts and information transparent to the American people, and to use that fact-finding process to help build a consensus about the need for reform, whether that's in terms of legislation or changes made by federal agencies. That requires lawmakers and a leadership within the executive branch, being willing to engage in that process, which again focuses more on, is government working for the American people in a way that makes sense today, rather than the politics.
Tim, let's talk about an opportunity that's coming up. The GAO currently does not have a confirmed Comptroller General of the United States, and there will be a process to which an individual will be selected soon. That individual will need to be nonpartisan, likely focused on identifying fraud and mismanagement, will likely need to understand and apply technology and think about how to communicate not only to Congress, but to the public about where things stand in government. How do you think about that appointment? What might you say is necessary? And what should be the focus of that individual to help ensure there's effective governance going forward?
I think it is an incredible time or opportunity right now with that changeover in Comptroller Generals. And I think the incoming CG is going to need to have a mindset of, how might I leverage these tools, viewing GAO as the national treasure it is, looking at all the findings that it has together, how to think about that instead of a sort of an isolated, here's one report, and that's where it's like in a box and that's it. Really thinking about the issues overall and creating these sort of immersive, imagine the ability to chat with GAO information. It's platinum class quality information. It's very fact-based, like you said, nonpartisan, James-Christian. It's one of the few places of trust, I think, of all American institutions because of these things. So how do we unlock those things and make it shine so it's less of, I don't know Dan's life on the Hill, but I can imagine at times you're trying to look something up. It's maybe you go to a search engine and maybe you get 1,000 links. Right? You need to have answers given to you. And that's what a lot of the newer technologies are now bringing you. What if you're driving answers directly from GAO, CRS, trusted information, and doing it just in time, because that's the ops tempo of the Hill. And so changing the time and operational dynamic exponentially is really important. Having a content-centric view rather than a report-centric view. We issued a report. Okay, now we issue another report. Delivering content, and that content's going to be, maybe it's put out in this podcast. Like I know we're humans doing a podcast, but that you all have seen, I'm sure, or heard about the AI where you can just put in documents and a podcast comes out of that. So you can imagine a member listening to the work as if someone's briefing in a virtual way, right? These are all the new unbelievable ways of not only to synthesize trusted information, but to deliver it just in time in the right place, on the right platforms, et cetera. That's one of the biggest things that I think, having this digital first mindset a content-centric mindset, not changing the motherhood apple pie GAO by all means. None of that should change, not the auditing standards, none of that, but how we compute and how we derive information at the right time, in the right place, and the right scale. Leveraging these tools is, I think, the way of the future.
Dan, what do you think about in terms of what would be needed from a leader of GAO in the future? What would be needed in terms of leadership from the Congress? And I have to put this in the context of, in the backdrop, we have a time like now, like none other, for actual reform. You do have leaders in the White House, leaders on the Hill, talking about how can government be better? And so this is an opportunity to really reform things in ways that people have been talking about for decades. So how do you get there, given that you have this opportunity with another appointment of the Comptroller General? How do you get there? And what advice do you have for leaders on the Hill or those working in the executive branch?
I completely agree with Tim that GAO is a national treasure. And I agree with you, James-Christian, that this appointment is such a historic opportunity, both for the Congress and for the Trump administration, to choose a new leader who will lead GAO over the next 15 years. And during that time, our nation is going to be confronting some major challenges, whether it's technological change, the coming fiscal crisis that we talked about. It's absolutely essential that Congress and the Trump administration prioritize this nomination. And Tim asked earlier the value of GAO on Capitol Hill. The reports that GAO provides and the expertise that GAO's dedicated workforce provide to the Hill is invaluable. But then again, I think there's an opportunity for Congress and GAO and its next leader to think about how can GAO provide more value to Congress and the American people. In the past, these transitions have involved or followed refinement in GAO's mission, and there could be statutory reforms describing what the Comptroller General and GAO should focus on. But it starts with choosing and confirming a new Comptroller General who is capable, trusted on both sides of the aisle, and committed to confronting the nation's biggest challenges.
Tim, in thinking about the nation's biggest challenges, what are the major issues? We've got a lot going on in the world. What would you describe are the major issues, major trends? It could be national security, it could be global competitiveness. Which issues would you raise in saying that these issues are the reason why we really need effective governance right now and for the future?
The biggest one is when you're talking about the trillions of dollars of debt. It's just, again, so we'll just start with that. But I would say in the age of AI, this is also a massive, almost like a Cold War, but AI, I don't want to say arms as in weaponizing AI, although that's a risk, but I'm saying AI like winning the economic race with AI is a big deal. I was in India last week, and the White House was there to bring the American tech stack as an export to the world. I think that's a major geopolitical issue of our time. AI is a double-edged sword. It brings a lot of good to things, but also the deep fakes risks and all these other misinformation, the use of these things to help sway elections is, of course, also a concern. Geopolitical stability is an ongoing thing. And we've seen, of course, there's a shakeup in what has been, I would just call it the Marshall-oriented world order post-World War II. The rules of the road are changing with respect to trade and economics. I could keep going, right? There's aging demographics is a big issue. We obviously know immigration's been a big thing, and we're seeing it not only here in the U.S., but in Europe, just the immigration policy, how we do that. But aging is, again, a big thing. We have demographic time bombs that are coming in and what we do and how we take care of our elderly and so on, and then who supports the systems like Social Security coming up when it's 3-to-1 or something like that, whereas maybe it was closer to 20 or 22-to-1 back when Social Security started. That's the kind of thing that I think we need to deal with.
Let's end on a positive note. Tim, what gives you optimism about the future of public sector innovation and accountability? Where do you see real momentum building?
The easy answer, I could be a tech optimist. There's obviously a lot of what's called doomerism around AI. I don't subscribe entirely into that particular piece. The priority is really on the young people coming up who are digital natives, who are able to now learn and consume more and do amazing things. So I'm optimistic about leveraging the talents, just as in our 250 years of existence as a country, for leveraging the talents of sometimes people, these folks without titles or without fancy this or that, but they're American problem solving, American can-do type mentality, leveraging these sort of things to have that problem solving and collaborative mindset. I am optimistic about that. I think there's just like when we were younger, we needed to have maturity. There's a difference between cleverness and wisdom. But I think if we can solve for X, where we have those of us who have been around a little bit longer, but have the coaching and mentoring into that younger generation but at the same time, giving them the innovation oxygen to be themselves, to come in. They're very altruistic, idealistic. They want to solve things. I think there's a key way to be able to do that. And that's what's exciting to me.
I think we have an incredibly resilient country, and we have everything within our country that we need to be successful going forward. Dan, my last question to you is, what would be your advice to our lawmakers on the Hill about where we can go from here and what's needed to ensure that we have the innovation, accountability, and future that we all need, want, and deserve?
I would encourage them to seize the day. You take advantage of their historic opportunity to address these challenges, work across the aisle, you bring facts to the American people, and move quickly to address some of these big problems. We can't afford to keep kicking the can on our nation's broken finances, and we need to be prepared to make some really difficult decisions in that regard.
Very insightful conversation. Tim Persons, Dan Lips, thank you both for joining us and for your continued leadership in strengthening governance, oversight, and innovation.
Thanks very much.
Thanks so much.
Management Matters is a presentation of the National Academy of Public Administration, produced by Lizzie, Alwan, and Matt Hampton, and edited by Matt Hampton.